How do you know if the current trend in the market is the beginning of this new trend or whether we're late in the trend and it's about to reverse? This is a common question that comes up all the time because I think we've all been burnt in a moment where we enter into a trend, it looks great, and then shortly after we enter into the trend, prices reverse. What turned into a winning trade ends up being a losing trade, and it can really add some frustration to trading. So I want to help give you some tips today to help answer that question of how do we know whether we're early into the trend or whether we're late into the trend, and pick up some clues from the market. So the first tip that I want to share with you is using an oscillator called the Relative Strength Index. This is an oscillator that appears at the bottom of the chart. It's called RSI. It's going to wave up and down between 0 and 100. And what it does is it gauges the relative strength of the market. Now, a lot of people look at the RSI, the Relative Strength Index, as a means of whether the instrument is overbought and oversold, and it can certainly be used in that regard. But we're going to turn it around and use it as a means of when it's overbought, that tells us that it's a relatively strong trend. And when it's oversold, that tells us that it's a really, really weak trend. And so sticking with the 70 and the 30 levels, which are the common input levels for RSI, what we want to look for is divergence within the extremes within RSI. So for example, we're taking a look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin has been in a monster trend for, well, pretty much for the month of October. It's up about 27%. Most of that increase has come within the past couple of weeks. PayPal announcing that you'll be allowed to own some Bitcoin through them. And so it has created more interest in the cryptocurrency. So using Bitcoin as an example, what we're looking at within RSI is the first poke that it makes up above the 70 level is usually not the signal to sell. Oftentimes you'll get a really strong move up above that 70 level. Back in August, we saw Bitcoin move up from an RSI perspective up into the mid 80s. Now, an RSI level of that kind of strength tells you that you're in the meat of the trend. And then later on, we could see that prices did come on up. After that high in RSI, prices did come up and create another high after that. Meanwhile, RSI created a lower high. And that's usually the symptom that you're late into the trend, is you get this divergence between price and the relative strength oscillator. A higher high on price, a lower high on the oscillator tells you this trend is tiring. It's kind of like driving down the road and your vehicle runs out of gas. The moment your vehicle runs out of gas, it's not like it stops. There's momentum behind it that's pushing it forward. But the moment you run out of gas, you no longer have that push of momentum behind you. And if you happen to be running out of gas while you're rolling up a hill, well then what you're going to find out is that you're going to reverse a lot quicker. If you run out of gas while you're rolling downhill, you'll be able to carry on a bit further. So it kind of depends on the market conditions. The divergence doesn't say sell, it just warns you that there's trouble ahead and a correction is looming. And so within Bitcoin, we have a bit of divergence as we run into the high, and then we run into a bigger correction that we'd seen in several months, and since then we've run on up to a new high. Now, comparing the recent two highs, the one from mid-August, and comparing the high that we're seeing now, we have a higher high in price, and even from an RSI perspective, the relative strength index is near the same levels. And so based on this, I would suggest, and even when you focus on the trend that we've seen from September, prices continue to motor higher and we don't have any kind of divergence appearing in the relative strength index. So by this indicator alone, I would lean towards we're in the early part of a trend for Bitcoin that could see much higher prices coming. So that's one level of which to consider, whether the current trend is strong enough. And if we move back, and if we just were to back test this, for example, and take a look at the March uptrend that we saw, notice that as prices kept motoring higher up until the high that we saw, let's see, when was that? In May. Notice how RSI continued its trek higher and it topped out in May. Once it topped out in May, prices went sideways. We did see a couple of brief instances of higher highs in price, but it was not met with that higher high in the RSI. So that tells us that we're going through some type of a correction, and the correction ended up being relatively shallow, and from there prices continued higher into the recent divergence. If we move this back, let's take a look at a weekly chart, and let's go back in time a little bit. Okay, even through this run up that we saw back in late 2017, you can see we crossed up, we hit about 80 on RSI, and then we come down, we correct a little bit, we cross below. Then we cross back up, strong RSI, we cross back below. So in both of these instances, we ended up receiving a relatively stronger RSI on these last three peaks going in. Now, it wasn't until this ultimate high that we've seen did RSI receive a very strong level. We dropped back below 70 and then very briefly poked back up above 70. So there's that divergence that signaled this was, danger zone ahead. We're nearing the end of the trend. And then from there, we've gone through a long correction. Now, since reaching the bottom in 2019, we've had another swing to the upside. RSI's had another swing to the upside. And then you'll notice here that we reach a high, and then we have a dip below 70, and then another high that comes in that ends up being a lower high on RSI. That is met with some additional lower highs here. Prices end up correcting. So I think according to the RSI model, we're early into this uptrend. Now that's one way to look at it. Some more advanced techniques that you can use to determine whether we are early into the uptrend or late into the uptrend. The first one is we can go out and we can measure the depths of the corrections. So these labels that you see on the chart, these are Elliott Wave labels. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out here and I'm going to measure the depth of this wave 2. And it comes in at about 14%. So I'm going to do this for each of these corrections. 14%, that was about 20%. And then this correction up here was about 22%. So more or less, all of these corrections have been coming in at about the same level, 15, 20%. Now, if one of these corrections was really, really large, let's say it came in at like 50%, whereas all the others were coming in at 20%, well, that tells us that that trend that was 50% was a different kind of trend to the downside than the previous corrections that we've seen. But since this correction that we experienced in August and September, since it was in line with the size of the corrections that we'd seen previously, well, this is an indication that all of these up waves and all of these down waves are a part of the same family, and it's the same family that continues to move itself higher. Now, one last trick that I want to show you, but before I do, I want to put out there that if you like this type of content, if you want to see more videos on this, feel free to let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section, give me a thumbs up on the video below. That will let me know if you like these types of videos, if you want to see more of them. So lastly, when we look at Elliott Wave and actually labeling out the waves, I've got labeled here an impulse wave, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so I'm showing this wave ended in that August high, and then we went through a 3-wave correction right here into that September low. And then from there we've started to move higher. So what this appears to be to me is a wave 1 higher, larger wave 2 lower, and then we're accelerating higher in a wave 3. Now, if indeed this is a wave 3, then we should very easily blow by the 2019 highs and push above 14,000. And then we should very easily push above the all-time high sitting at 20,000 if this is a wave 3 to the upside. So this is the preferred count. I do think that Bitcoin is about to take off to the upside. But regardless of what other market that I'm looking at, one thing that I want to always try to balance myself in is, well, what if I'm wrong? What if Bitcoin does not take off to the upside? What if right at this moment it turns tail and it heads to the downside and maybe back down to 10,000, let's say? What would the wave count look like in that perspective? Well, in this case, we still have a very clear 3-wave move lower, ABC. And then from there, we have a bit of a strong wave higher, so it doesn't look like it's a wave B, but maybe what this could be, pun intended, is maybe this is like an A and then a B wave higher, and then we'll get a C wave lower. Now, I think this is a lower probability. It's possible. I don't think it's probable right now because of the RSI portion of the lesson that I shared with you earlier. RSI is acting way too strong for this to act like a B wave. If we go out and if we look at other examples of B waves in the market, so let's take a look here at euro dollar. Let me try this on a daily. Okay, so here's euro dollar. All right, now this euro dollar, I would consider this to be a B wave right here, this B wave low. And you'll notice that we do have some divergence with this B wave low and the previous swing here. So there was a very clear divergence within euro dollar. Let's take a look at dollar index. Dollar index, same type of thing. We've got a B wave high where the B wave pushes beyond the previous wave extreme, and this is accompanied by divergence. And going back to Bitcoin, Bitcoin is not in that type of a camp. You've got a new high here, but so far this new high is really not accompanied by any kind of divergence. The relative strength index appears to be moving higher quite swiftly. Just a second. So as a result, this is possible that, and we can measure out how far B waves typically go. For kicks and giggles, let me just throw this this mark out here for you. Typically the B wave is going to run about 1618 or 1382. And that happens to be where I've drawn that box. You know, we're right into the lower portion of this box right now. So if Bitcoin were to turn and head south practically immediately between now and 14,000, then we would consider this possibly as a B wave. But if it keeps motoring higher like it is with a lot of strength and momentum behind it, I think it's going to slice through 14,000 and 20,000 like a hot knife through butter and moving itself up. The next area of wave relationships is going to be up in that 30 to 40,000 area. So time will tell, you know, where we get there, and that's just the next level. There's several other levels of wave relationships at much higher levels, but yeah, it looks like Bitcoin, the trend is in the early stages of making a strong move higher. And here's a couple of tools to help determine when you're looking at Bitcoin or any other markets out there, whether we're early into the trend or later into the trend. So again, if you like these types of videos, go ahead and give me a thumbs up, leave a comment below, and I want to wish you all the best of luck in your trading. We will talk to you soon. Y'all take care. Bye now.